Of all the many rebel leaders who shine out of Irish history, one stands out as an effective revolutionary, Michael Collins. Well-read, active in the Gaelic League, a member of the secret Irish Republican Brotherhood, the IRB, he'd been interned after the 1916 rising at Frongoch in North Wales.
Collins got really busy there. He had quite a number of his own people from West Cork. We used to call them the Mafia. They ran the whole camp. He saw that everybody in charge of the hutments was an IRB man and people in pivotal positions were IRB. He organised classes of all kinds, both educational and military. And he saw to it that more attention was paid to guerrilla fighting. And we had fellows in there from all parts of Ireland in Frongoch. And he built up a great system of contacts there in that way. And it was then, too, that he began to get information about friendly police, you know, fellows who had done good acts for the lads after 1916 in various parts of the country. And he followed those all up, and invariably he recruited those men.
In Ireland, the man who dominated nationalist opinion was John Redmond, leader of the Parliamentary Party, demanding implementation of the 1914 Home Rule Act for all Ireland, as was his lieutenant, John Dillon. But the government now wouldn't give Home Rule without excluding parts of Ulster. Dillon and Redmond were failing, and new men were about to challenge the Irish Party's dominance. A tiny minority had been keeping things warm for them.
We kept very closely together through the Gaelic League, which was one of the few organisations not suppressed. It was not suppressed. And we had weekly cycle runs and that, ostensibly cycle runs, but it was more or less military training. So when the men came out at Christmas, they had something to start on.
The men out at Christmas were the apparently less important internees. Among them, Michael Collins. Through the Irish Republican Brotherhood, they set surreptitiously to work among the old volunteers.
When we came back to Macroom, the volunteers had, if you like, died down in the meantime. The bunch who remained behind had simply marked time. And we got them started again. And then we started our recruiting campaign again, and the reaction was entirely different.
We started a bogus branch of the Gaelic League in Rathmines called the Thomas Davis branch. I was secretary of it. And it was a cover for the volunteers of that area to meet in.
In July 1917, all prisoners were released as a gesture of goodwill by the British government. The volunteers organised a welcome for them, which demonstrated a new mood in Irish opinion. Constance Markowitz had been condemned to death. This new mood had already been seen in 2 surprise by-election victories by a new political group of Republicans, working together with other advanced nationalists who'd earlier been known as Sinn Féin, we ourselves. And when Eamon de Valera, senior surviving commandant of the Rising, stood as Sinn Féin candidate in a 3rd by-election at East Clare, the volunteers worked tirelessly for him against the Parliamentary Party candidate Lynch, who was expected to win. But the priests, who'd always supported the Parliamentary Party before, were beginning to switch allegiance.
Father Scanlon was a melodramatic kind of fellow, and De Valera was sitting beside him, and he said, "Valera," says he, not De Valera, "Valera, give me your hand." So De Valera looked at him as much as to say, "What on earth's wrong with you?" But he did give him his hand. And he turned to the people and he said, "Valera, you have given me your hand. In return, I give you the hearts of my people." Now, that sounds absolutely ridiculous, but it brought down the house, and including quite a number of Lynchites who were there to mock, and they went away and eventually voted for him.
The victory was an amazing triumph. De Valera himself took the leadership of a new Sinn Féin party in which militant Republicans officially joined Arthur Griffith to merge with his brand of advanced but non-violent nationalism. A grim event brought a wave of popular sympathy to the new movement. A volunteer, Thomas Ashe, who'd been out in the 1916 Rising, died in British custody through forcible feeding while on hunger strike. His funeral proved a great national demonstration. And Michael Collins himself declared at the graveside that that volley was the only speech that it was proper to make over the grave of a dead Fenian. Meanwhile, the Great War was going badly for the Allies. Though on the Western Front, tens of thousands of Irishmen from north and south were fighting side by side as volunteers, the British began to consider extending conscription to Ireland. Irish public opinion massed against the proposal. Irish volunteers and Sinn Féin supporters exploited this new wave of national resentment to the full. People signed the anti-conscription pledge in thousands. A military-minded viceroy was appointed, General French, who, disliking the new national mood in Ireland, sniffed, he thought, a pro-German plot. He had most of the Sinn Féin leaders arrested, Collins, who had prior information, being one of the few to escape. In December 1918, just after the end of the war, came the first British general election for 8 years on a new register, 3 times larger than before, and including women over 30 and all men over 21. This rather favoured Sinn Féin, which was a young movement. Its candidates were standing for an independent Irish republic and saying that if elected, they wouldn't go to London, but would sit in Dublin as the Irish Parliament. What also gave Sinn Féin a chance was that many former Home Rule voters were now prepared to vote Sinn Féin, not because they thought really they were going to get an Irish republic, but because they thought that this way they might get a really full measure of all-Ireland Home Rule. Then there was the rigging of the vote by Sinn Féin supporters.
It was rigged largely to the extent that the register had been marked very carefully in all the constituencies, and anybody who was sick or who was dead was voted for right from the minute the poll opened.
You went into this poll and viewed as Paddy so-and-so. He might have been killed in France for that matter. He might be dead, you know. And you wore had a pinhead here in your coat, so that the officer sitting at the table would know you were a Sinn Féin man, you know. And he wouldn't question you.
So did you vote more than once?
Oh, I voted about 20 times. Different polling booths, you know, all for Phil Shanahan. And I was only one of many.
But the Sinn Féin victory was a genuine landslide. They won 3/4 of all the Irish seats. The old Irish party was annihilated. These men and women duly pledged not to go to Westminster, but to meet in Ireland and declare independence, duly did just that. They met in Dublin as Dáil Éireann, permitted for a time by the British government. But declaring independence by no means meant they'd got it. So how, against the might of the British Empire, was this independence to be made real? Outside the Dáil, American flags waved along with the new Irish tricolour, symbolising hopes that the big three at the peace conference, particularly the American President Woodrow Wilson, would recognise the rights of all small nations, including Ireland. But in this moment of Allied triumph, President Wilson was not going to disturb it by a quarrel with the British Prime Minister Lloyd George. So what was Sinn Féin to do? To reinforce the appeal to America, De Valera went there in the middle of 1919. He collected money for the cause from the American Irish. He did not obtain official recognition of an Irish republic. But there was another way, violence. And the first positive steps in that direction had already been taken by individual volunteers acting on their own initiative on a day in January 1919. Towards this quarry at Solihull Beg on that day came two Irish constables of the Royal Irish Constabulary, both Catholics, both very popular in the neighbourhood. One was a widower with 4 children, escorting a cart carrying a load of gelignite. They were set upon in the road down there by masked volunteers and shot down with revolvers at point-blank range. The volunteers stripped the bodies of rifles and ammunition and made off with the gelignite. One of those who carried out the killing was a young volunteer named Dan Breen, who had received no orders from Collins or from anybody else.
If we were to wait to get orders from Dublin, or from our headquarters, or from the land to do anything, nothing would ever happen. We acted as the opportunity arose in guerrilla warfare. If you want to carry out guerrilla warfare, you just can't be waiting for someone 100 or 200 miles away to tell you to do something. You seize the opportunity and do it.
2 girls that day passed the place on the road where the 2 policemen were lying dead. And in telling me about it, they said, the driver didn't look right or left, but drove on and didn't say a word or speak a word to them about it.
It was to be the beginning of a reign of terror against the police. And Michael Collins himself, with his underground contacts in Dublin, now systematically extended the killing of policemen as an answer to Britain's refusal to grant independence. Strict military control was extended to Tipperary and other parts of Ireland, the very measures on which Collins was relying to create a strong national anti-British mood throughout the country. Collins was at this time leading a double life. As Minister of Finance for the Dáil, which was now suppressed, he organised a vast loan for the Irish Republic and was secretly filmed at the opening ceremony with leading figures of Sinn Féin. At the same time, he was directing the operations of the Volunteers, or as they were soon to be called, the Irish Republican Army.
I often talk to him about a supply of arms, and his invariable reply, well, why don't you go out and get them?
And a great man on timing. If he said, you be here at 9 o'clock, you to be there at 9 o'clock. And that was that.
He had such tremendous energy. And in any meeting he was in, he was always the dominant personality.
He had all the qualities that men loved. He was a wonderful leader, wonderful man to get everything he wanted done. He wouldn't take no for an answer from anybody.
He was boyish, enthusiastic, would crack jokes.
He was very ruthless, kind of person who would, he never give you a second chance.
I loved him. I'd have willingly laid down my life for Collins at any time. And I think to me, a cheap price to pay.
Gifted with great powers of organisation, Collins not only successfully raised and administered a loan of over £4 million in today's money, but was systematically penetrating the British intelligence system in Ireland.
And around midnight, he said, well, we'll go for a walk. I thought, it was a queer time to go for a walk, and this fellow's on the run. So we finished up at Pearse Street Station. Colonel Broy, who was later on Commissioner of the Guards, was the sergeant in charge that night. He was an IRB man, of course. So we went into Pearse Station up to the first floor and to Inspector McFeely's office and opened the files, and that's where we got, I remember we stupidly didn't bring a torch with us, but we got some candles, and I know I've got a lot of candle grease in my hands holding the candle while we're going through the files to find out which of the G men was on political work and who wasn't. And the fellows that were on political work got a note to say they pack it up or else.
They give you the lowdown on them and where they were, and you just went and rubbed them out. And you reported back. You didn't put it in writing, you reported back that they were gone, that's all.
Early in 1920, Collins gave orders for the shooting of a detective named Barton.
But he came out of a hallway and crossed the street at College Green and into College Street. And as he was stepping off this footpath to go over to the police station, Mick MacDonald let go of him. 2 or 3 more shots rang out. And he fell on his knee. He turned around and he pulled his gun out of his pocket. And he said, what did I do to deserve this dead?
This was the work of Collins's Dublin squad, in which he took an almost fatherly interest. One member of that squad was Vinnie Byrne.
Collins used to come down maybe twice a week. He was the only man that ever came near us. And it was a great boost to us that if he could ramble around the city, come into the dump and give us some kind of a heart, well, it was worth going on with, you know. He come in and 2 hands stuck in his trousers pockets and, how are ye going on, lads? Oh, not bad, Michael. Yeah. Well, God be with you now and go on with the good work. I went to confession of Father Moriarty in William Street. And that held him a few things, then I kept the big one till the last, you know. I said that, I shot a man, Father. Oh my God, he said, what happened? Oh. So I told him he was shot in the fight for freedom.
Which man was that you had shot? Which man was it you had shot?
It was, what do I call him? Ravel. So he says to me, do you really believe in your conscience, he says to me, goodbye, that you're doing right? I said, yes, Father, I honestly believe. Good man, he said, God bless you. He gave me my blessing and out.
On the 15th of March 1920, the Mayor of Cork, Thomas McCurtain, was shot dead by a masked gang dressed in civilian clothes. But the curious thing about this gang was that they spoke with English accents. The police were beginning to hit back. Reinforcements for the police were being recruited in England, and because there weren't enough bottle green RIC uniforms to go around, some of the new recruits were equipped with khaki additions and became known as the Black and Tans. They weren't a special body, but reinforcements for the Royal Irish Constabulary. About 7,000 of them altogether, often attracted simply by the money.
£4.12 and 6 a week. And with your overtime there, because you was out 16 hours out of the 24, more or less, sometimes more than that. Well, it came to a considerable sum in those days. Now, every end of the month you got paid. You sent my mother 30 shillings every week.
Soon afterwards, a special auxiliary police force was recruited, made up of ex-officers, and to be known as auxiliaries, though all the new forces were often loosely referred to as the Tans.
I joined it because there were no jobs about. And, you know, things were pretty rough. And I saw an advert in the paper that they wanted men for Ireland. And I went up to Whitehall for an interview, and I went to Ireland the same night.
They were to be a force of only 1,500 men. But they were to make up for lack of numbers by their aggressiveness, a formidable force against the IRA.
There were two types, of course. The auxiliaries were much the most dangerous because they were really courageous. They had absolutely no cowards in them, and they didn't care what they did, as far as I could see. The Tans, well, no, I never got beaten up myself, but they shot 3 friends of mine on the bridge in Killaloe, whom they'd just captured.
They were charming. They were always drunk, of course. And their great delight was to roar up and down the road in their big open army trucks, letting off rounds of blank ammunition to any woman they saw by herself.
By late 1920, Ireland had become a grim battleground, a scene of guerrilla warfare between 2 increasingly ruthless bands of armed men, the Tans and the IRA. The IRA blew up bridges, set ambushes, and interfered generally with British communications all over Ireland.
And the IRA, they used to dig trenches in the road around the corners to try and get, well, to stop traffic and to get people to fall in.
You come across this and down and go your front wheels, wallop, straight in. And that's when they used to throw, and they might have 1 or 2 homemade salmon tin bombs. Occasionally they'd have 1 or 2 of them, you know, and they'd throw them over.
In the bombs there was jelly night, bolts, pieces of iron, and scrap metal.
It would always shoot in the back, naturally. We had 2 fellas shot in the back in Macroom while they were walking down the street.
The IRA also dealt with Irishmen as informers.
3 armed men in trench coats knocked at the door. His wife answered it, and they said, "Is the Becker in?" He said, "Yes, we want to see him." He called to the door, and they shot him before his wife on the doorstep.
In all this, the British Army played a relatively subsidiary role.
The Black and Tans were rather welcomed by us because they had more liberty than we had, you see. We were in the position of the ordinary British soldier who must not retaliate. The Black and Tans did retaliate and, in fact, went too far.
The Black and Tans came into the picture because the regular army were too decent to do the job. And this is a fact. The regular army were very, very much liked. A lot of them married and stayed there.
We weren't frightened of British soldiers at all. We loved them. I mean, an awful lot of us girls had dates with them and went out with them. But at the same time, we were warned about being seen with them because we knew that some girls had had their hair cut off and 1 or 2 girls had been shot by the IRA.
The ordinary poor British Tommy was a decent fella. We had very little grudge against him. We didn't want to hurt him at all. It was the intelligence officers, the Black and Tans, the deliberately organised ruffians that we were up against.
ruthless to the marked degree of going to the limit of law and order. We'll put it that way. Now, we get the message. A farm had been burnt down, or the road had been dug up and the trees dropped down in the road, and we got ambushed then with armour plating on, you know. It didn't do a lot of harm to us, and then we went on.
We could tell the way raids were going by the sounds of the Crossley tenders, which the Dans used. They had a distinctive note. If those tenders stopped anywhere around there, you were likely to get the search.
Now, if you found any culprits or caught any there, well, you simply just arrested them and brought them in and interrogated them. We may interrogate them there and then on the scene. I'm not going to tell you what happened. And question them. And if you got anything out of them, well and good.
And the search was really quite brutal. They kick the door in, stick a bayonet up against you, you know. Well, they terrified us, and then they searched the house. It's only quite fair to say they'd good reason for it, you know.
We'd search for arms. Now, the floorboards would come up if it was elsewhere, that. The fireplace, peat, if it was in, well, it was taken out. The bed was ripped open. We found rifles, revolvers, and ammunition.
If at first the ordinary Irish people had disliked the violence used by the volunteers or IRA, there could be no doubt on whose side they would come down in the end, the longer this sort of thing went on. IRA men brought in with a captured Republican flag for interrogation.
We used to question very strictly. And then what we did, we used to put pressure on them. Now, there was notices posted up. Every black and tan shot, and the 2 Sinn Féiners shot. We put them on the telepoles, trees, etc.
An auxiliary casualty.
Human beings are going to stand so much and so much. That's all, not all of it. And you're going to retaliate, aren't you? You're not going to be simple John and sit there and get smacked across the nose. If you're going to get killed, well, if your life's at stake, the other fellow's going before you. Well, that's my way to look at it.
Burning, by way of reprisal, became a standard police reaction. The burning of farms, the burning of towns. Cooperative creameries were burned as a means of hitting through their jobs more people than could be burned out of a house. As an Irish newspaper put it, when they threw petrol on a Sinn Féiner's house, they were merely pouring paraffin on the flames of Irish nationality.
An old man, locally he was called Black Willie. He had about 4 or 5 sons in the IRA. None of them were there when the auxiliaries came. But they came in nevertheless and said they had to kill somebody in the house, and he would do, the old man would do. So his wife and daughter struggled with them, and this was just going on in a little kitchen. And a boy, one of his boys who had TB was sick, and he had been hiding somewhere adjacent. And he came out and said, "Don't kill my father. If you have to kill someone, kill me." So then the women tried to save him. And he put their hands away and he went out. And they shot him on the doorstep outside the door.
The war was in the streets of Dublin too. roundups and searches for arms as whole areas of the city were cordoned off. Tempers frayed, and it became easier and easier, as Collins had calculated, for the Irish people to see this as a war against an England denying independence. Gun battles in the streets set civilians panicking. A British intelligence officer, Lieutenant Price, cornered an IRA man, Sean Tracy, in Talbot Street, Dublin. Price was shot dead. So was Tracy. A spectacle of death of a different sort was provided by Terence McSweeney, Mayor of Cork, who died in a British prison after 73 days on hunger strike. His coffin was escorted into Cork by auxiliaries. His funeral, at which Arthur Griffith headed the mourners, was a massive display of Irish national solidarity. A street ambush in Dublin, at which a British soldier was killed, led to the arrest of an 18-year-old student member of the IRA, Kevin Barry.
The Black and Tans arrested Barry. They brought him into our barracks, which was very near, and ill-treated him, beat him up, and our Sergeant Major had to get our guard to turn out to rescue Barry from the police. That was the way he received his injuries.
In spite of massed protests, Barry was hanged, the first of 24 IRA men to be executed in the next 8 months. This is Michael Collins's plan for a terrible day in November 1920 to be known as Bloody Sunday. Collins had located the hideouts of a number of undercover British intelligence officers in Dublin, some of them actually posing as Sinn Féin supporters. Collins gave orders for them all to be shot in their houses individually by IRA men at 9 o'clock that Sunday morning.
And I had 8 men with me. And we agreed that we'd meet outside St. Andrew's Church in Westland Row at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning. Some of us got mass that morning there. And we proceeded along to the house. Knocked at the door. The servant opened the door. And I said, I want to see Captain Bennett or Lieutenant Ames. Oh, she says, they're in bed. And she went to close the door, and I just put my foot in. So it's all right, so I'm a friend of theirs. So she looked behind me and she seen the other men. Then we all got in any case. And she said to me, the folding doors is open. That is, I'd have no trouble. And she, Captain Bennett sleeps in there, and Lieutenant Ames sleeps down there. She was doing very good, you know. So I sent 3 men down to cover off Ames. And I went through the folding doors. And as I went through the folding doors, your man went for his pillow. He had a 45 Colt automatic under the pillow, because there was 5 or 6 guns covered in them. So I said to him, well, come on, get out. And he went down to Captain or Lieutenant Ames's room. I put the two of them up against the wall. I said, the Lord have mercy on your souls. I plugged the two of them.
"14 British officers were shot altogether that Sunday morning, but the day was still young. There was to be an important football match at Croke Park that afternoon. One of the Tipperary forwards was Tommy Ryan. The whistle had just gone for a foul by a Dublin player.
I was at that time able to take a free into the Dublin goal when the next thing happened was fire was opened from the canal end of the field, machine gun fire and rifle and revolver fire.
Soldiers, black and tans, I can't really say which, appeared on the surrounding walls and started firing into the crowd.
It was obvious that they were live bullets because the bullets were hopping off the railway wall. And I was a senior volunteer officer at the time, and I knew exactly that it was live ammunition, and I threw myself flat on the ground.
The park was adjoined by a railway line and the canal. Some, I believe, actually got across the canal, but these I saw hundreds of people running down the railway line towards safety. It's the most fantastic sight.
A Tipperary player was one of the 12 killed. In further reprisal for that morning's killing, 2 senior IRA men and an innocent Sinn Féin supporter from County Clare, who'd been arrested the night before, were murdered by the police in the guardroom of Dublin Castle. McKee, Clancy, and the innocent Clune. Their funeral was marked by the daring open appearance of the very man directing IRA operations, Michael Collins, with a large sum of money on his head.
Well, my mother was a great woman for funerals, and my mother with a neighbour was standing outside the church watching, you see. The neighbour, stupidly, she saw Michael Collins, who was standing somewhere nearby. "Oh, look," she said, "there's Mick Collins." And apparently he looked over and saw these 2 women. So he glared at her and said, "You bloody bitch." Well, it would have been in character with the man, you know. He didn't suffer fools gladly.
By December 1920, there were some 700 of the dreaded auxiliaries in Ireland. Their routine patrols were ambushed from time to time, and after one such ambush, a reprisal was carried out on a hitherto unprecedented scale against the centre of the city of Cork.
He started in revenge for the casualties we'd received in the ambush. We had 11 casualties there when we were ambushed. They first busted into 1 or 2 pubs and out themselves. Proceeded to set fire and loot. And they prevented the fire brigade putting out the fires.
When the fire brigades very bravely came out to contend, they even cut the hoses, you know, to prevent any help being given. And it was dreadful because in a lot of those big stores at that time, the employees slept upstairs. And the next day when you went down, there was nothing of them left, rubble and the smell of smoke.
Well, there was a certain tough gang in the K Company. They were the instigators of this, including the commanding officer. And they were the people who did a lot of the looting. About 25 of these people were responsible for most of the damage done in Cork.
An official British inquiry into the event was never made public. Disgust and embarrassment at this sort of thing was mounting in England. The IRA had by now developed armed flying columns of between 20 and 30 men who lived on the countryside, emerged from it to ambush Crown forces when informed of a suitable target, and melted back into it again. elusive, unpredictable, and tough. One such column came to Kilmichael in County Cork to wait for a convoy of auxiliaries expected down this road.
It rained all night as we marched, and we got here without anybody knowing it. We came across fields and through boreens, and the men were soaking wet. There were 36 men, 4 main sections. Number 1 section then was down behind the big rock, and there were 10 men on that. Was to take on the first lorry. Then number 2 section was up here, and there were 10 men there. These were to take on the second lorry. 7 men occupied those rocks along here, and their instructions were to keep these fellas from getting into the rocks and engaging us. And the command post was behind the little wall there, facing the auxiliaries as they came. From 8 o'clock in the morning, they were in their positions, and they weren't allowed to lift their head in case they'd be observed. And they had no food. It freezed hard, and their wet clothes were quite stiff. And they waited and waited and waited. And just about 4 o'clock, before it got dark, these fellows were signaled to us, coming along. And when the first lorry came along to us, I happened to be wearing volunteer officers, IRA officers, uniform coat, pants and leggings. They saw me standing in the ditch, and they slowed. And they were obviously puzzled as to who this officer was. But anyway, they kept coming along slowly and slowly when a bomb was thrown at them. And the whistle blew, fire was opened, and the fight was on. Eventually, anyway, 9 of the auxiliaries lay killed on the road. We had only 1 man killed. The second lorry had come to rest 35 yards from number 2 section, and they were fighting back and engaging the section. I heard these fellas shouting, "We surrender, we surrender, we surrender." And we saw them, some of them throw their rifles away. And when they did, 3 of this section stood up. And 2 of them, the auxiliaries opened fire immediately on them. And they killed them with revolver fire after surrendering. And I shouted at the same time to the section, "Keep firing and don't stop till I tell you." And they tried to surrender again, and I said, "Don't take any surrender." We wouldn't take prisoners after their false surrender and after killing 2 of our men. These fellows were all eventually killed.
Later, Barry was to outmaneuver the British Army at Cross Barry in County Cork. So how long could it go on like this without some political solution? By the spring of 1921, the 2 sides seemed locked in deadly guerrilla stalemate, though Lloyd George, the British Prime Minister, said he had murder by the throat.
We could never hope to stand up and fight the British in open battle. That would be suicide for us. And that was the danger, you see, when they formed columns, that the columns would get too big, you see, and that they'd be engaged and couldn't disengage. Our policy was always to hit hard, kill all you can, and get away. If we could succeed in getting the arms and ammunition from, well, then that was so much the good. But we could never afford to have heavy casualties in the early stage because our people, they'd lose heart.
Late in May 1921, the IRA launched their biggest operation of all in Dublin, the burning of the Customs House, an all-important centre of British administration in Ireland.
So I went upstairs, knocked at this door, and there was a man and a lady having a cup of tea with coming here on break. And I said to them, you better get out of here quick. We're going to set the place afire. Oh, you can't do that. I said, I can't. Get out. And when they seen the gun, so the lady said to me, well, I'll be able to get my coat and hat. So you'd be lucky you'd be get your life if you don't get out quick. So they got out in any case, and then I went over to 2 big safes. They were open. I took out all the ledgers and papers, put them on the top of the table, got me 2 gallons of petrol, spread it all over the place, got over to the door, lit a piece of paper and threw it in, and boom. The next thing I heard was rifle fire and revolver fire and a couple of bombs going off.
One auxiliary officer was due to return to England that day at the end of his tour of duty.
And the CO said, you better have lunch with me, Beaumont, farewell. And whilst we're having lunch, an orderly came in and said, armed men at the Customs House there. And the CO said, couple of crosslers, and out they go. I said, I'll have a last trip with the boys. He says, finish your lunch. And I said, no, I'll go with them. And we got there and found he was occupied by a Dublin company of the IRA, who immediately fired on us. We dropped down and returned the fire.
The British forces had arrived in the nick of time. The IRA were completely surrounded, 2 were shot down, the rest surrendered in large numbers. It was the greatest disaster the IRA had yet experienced.
It was very, very, very grave indeed. Force employed in this action included practically all of the active volunteers in Dublin City, some from the county. They were all captured. I think that the number that escaped from the Customs House attacking force would be a total of about 5, and 2 of those were killed. But of the rest of the people they were lined up, there were over 120.
The IRA was still powerful and active in the countryside, but in Dublin, Collins had lost most of his men and many of his arms. Where did this leave him?
In my opinion, in a hopeless position. Literally a hopeless position, because there was no fighting force left, literally, as well as the fact that the armaments were not available anyhow.
The organisation was good, the morale was good, but we had no arms. We had no ammunition particularly, and we had a variety of weapons. We had weapons of all kinds, and it was very hard to get ammunition for the most of them.
When you fired 6 rounds of ammunition, it was very hard to get another refill for a revolver.
Emmet Dalton, now Ireland's political leader, responded to the approaches of the equally exhausted British that he was ready to talk about a political solution if a truce were called. On the 9th of July 1921, both sides came to the Dublin Mansion House, escorted by IRA men, among them De Valera and the Mayor of Dublin. Among the British was the Commander-in-Chief in Ireland, General Macready. Ireland prayed for peace. And on the 11th of July, a truce was signed. The horror in which Ireland had lived for 2.5 years was suddenly over. But a political solution to satisfy both Britain and Ireland, including the IRA, would be much harder to come by, as no one realized more acutely than the first Irish leader to go to see the British government, Emmet Dalton.